What's up, everybody? Welcome to Formlessness, the show that's always being. I recorded an episode of this show yesterday, which is the one that you're watching, and I'm doing this intro now to share some important context. The problem that is being addressed in this episode is one of narcissism, plain and simple. And people have this character flaw for different reasons, and anybody can be exhibiting traits of this, but this is the problem at the core of this. Now, speaking more on a global macro sociological point of view, speaking from that point of view, I talk in this episode about the Chinese government being a influencer, an unconsensual influencer over the United States progression of cultural development. And I do this because on the actual scale of the global planet, this is true. However, on a even regional standpoint, it's interesting because, if we're talking regionally, the problem comes from Hispanic narcissism and Indian narcissism of the female gender. And yet, in order to solve this globally, the problem is with the Chinese government. So I'm talking in this episode about these things, and I just want to have this kind of disclaimer up front that what I'm saying is true and false at the same time. And so on an individual scale, to be healthy, we have a relationship with ourselves that is with our own self. Then in our community, we share ourselves clearly and transparently by communicating our actual intentions that we have discovered from our relationship with ourselves. And then the community creates the city, and the city creates the county, and the county creates the state, and the state creates the region. So what is true on a global scale is not necessarily true on a regional or community scale. So it is true that the Chinese government is what needs to change on a global scale, and yet the problem doesn't necessarily originate there, but it ends there. So enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the Patreon if you want to see the video of me now and me when I recorded this podcast yesterday with my friend in a nice natural environment. There's a whole other layer of information that you receive through watching the video of this. So subscribe to the Patreon and enjoy this big dump. It is finally time to unearth and put to rest the entire COVID fabrication because I have all of the keys and all of the answers, and I can speak about them in a way that is able to be understood and heard by all English speaking people from every culture on the globe. And for this reason, this is why COVID was created. As we know it, COVID. What COVID is a psychologically impactful bioweapon that has similar effects to the flu and a greater psychological impact that was and is a evolution of the MK Ultra style government testing done by impacting people psychologically, psychedelically, and that's what that is. But the reason it's called COVID is because my name has these initials, and stick with me here. In 2013, I dropped out of school where I went outside of Portland, Oregon, and I began creating a film. And if you feel like you've lost interest, just stick with this story. It will come around to put to peaceful rest all of the anxiety, all of the lost information, all of the confusion around this entire period from March of 2019 or 2020 or whatever till now. So what happened is that the natural progression of our species evolution, when 2020 occurred in linear time, the natural evolution of our species is to enter the fifth dimension, which is a place where the communication and perception moves forward, backwards, up and down, diagonally and sideways through time, where we can speak in this way I've been speaking for the last 45 seconds, where I kind of move back and forth, and it's able to be understood and made aware of as we are viewing ourselves as microcosms of the universe. And through that perception of oneness and equality, a peaceful relaxation occurs in the brain and nervous system, which allows for this kind of information processing to happen, where we take ideas and pigments of little moments of time that are not existing linearly, and we can still perceive them, accept them, and understand them in a sane and memorized way. So this knowledge has been existing in Central America for a long time, and in 2013, when I dropped out of school, I started making a film that was about how our perceptions can create reality in a parallel and relevant way to the fifth dimension. Now, what I began to realize over starting at that time is that the west coast of the United States of America is geographically positioned both underground and externally in a way that allows for a totalitarian arrangement of viewing to occur of the people in this area, because it's a finite zone that borders the coast. There's also a mushroom network underground throughout a lot of this area, and this area of the United States has long been part of a social engineering act that has different foots in different areas, pieces of in different but anyway, The point being is that here's the thing, right? You might think what I'm saying is a megalomaniac conspiracy theory that is a problem a sycophant would have of being too ego identified with reality. And while that may be true in part, the reason why, for your culture, I would say that would be seen as true in a legitimate way. But the reason why this problem continues to persist is because that ego identification is not the entire piece of the puzzle that's missing. The reality is that there is unconsensual social engineering that is occurring through a shadow entity that is aware of how these thought forms psychically and sociologically move through people and areas, and that social engineering has been precisely and intensely manicured in a way over the last 4 years based on several weak points in the United States culture and cultural history. And what has happened is the thought forms that are being generated, that are moving through people's minds, that are allowed to move through people's minds because of these weak spots in culture, these things do not represent what the United States is, what the United States stands for, and what the United States was built on. And so I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here. So I'm just going to allow some time for what I've said to sink in. Please take a few moments to just sit with how you feel. If you've forgotten what I've said, I've kind of been going on a few different tangents, and we're just going to let what I've said so far, sink in, cool around, and I'm going to hand the microphone to my friend, and I'm going to take a sip of my drink here. This is a commercial break featuring Noah Stratman.
Well said.
This is a commercial break. Thank you, but we're doing commercial, and so please do your commercial. I know you were telling me there's stuff you want to promote, and there's stuff that you've been hired to say, so say it now while I take a little break, because I'm also needing to take a break.
This has been from Clouds Emoji with Colin Oliver and Noah Stratman.
Okay, so the true foundation of the United States is freedom of individual expression. And there are several cultures across the globe that have huge vulnerabilities when it comes to precisely manicured social control, where a certain entity can implant an idea or concept into the mind of a populace, and because of the way the culture works, that idea can flow like wildfire. Cultures that have a feminine authority, feminine spiritual authority, like Hispanic people and Indian people, are the ones who have the biggest vulnerability to this. And many of these people have a thing where any idea that's implanted into their mind from a feminine energy, a feminine psychic energy, is viewed culturally as a truth, as a deity, as a authority. And this vulnerability, along with many women who exist in the United States who are just existing in mostly feminine energy, also have this vulnerability, and also are used to mirror and reflect every single idea that's implanted into their mind. So what has happened is there is a conscious entity that is creating these thought forms and ideas and inserting them into the United States to control the timeline, to control the vibration frequency, and to control the feeling of safety, individualism, self-empowerment. This does not reflect the values of the United States. It does not reflect the values of the Declaration of Independence. It is in exact opposition to those things. These thought forms are things that represent extreme oppression, extreme control, extreme surveillance, and the vulnerability of the youth of the United States as a country and the vulnerability of several other cultures is being consciously manipulated by an entity that is Chinese. This does not mean that Chinese people are bad, but it does mean that the country of China has either a conscious or shadow entity that is using massive amounts of resources to control the de-evolution of the United States feelings and reality of empowerment, individualism, and freedom. So, like I said, I do not take that lightly, and I have waited until I have true proof in my own life experience of understanding the source from which these things come, which is one of my many talents and expertises that I have consciously developed over time, is getting to the bottom of things. And what has happened, so maybe I'll let this sink in a little bit. That is essentially the key element that I want to express in this show, and yet there's many others, little pieces that will probably come to bring further clarity, peace, and healing to you in the remainder of this episode, but that is the core key. So going back to my story of how the West Coast, as a blossoming reflection of the new world of globalized consciousness, is also a heavily surveilled and finite area of land that can be mapped, and the cycles of these things can be very well surveilled by certain entities that have the resources to do such things. This area I came to in 2012, and then I started making this movie in 2013, and I can just, I don't know, I guess I'm also anxious.
I think there's horseradish in there.
Can you give me the microphone? Like one inch from my face?
Maybe it's dill. Might be dill.
The thing is, while Canada has a very beautiful masculine 5D knowledge and energy, the west coast of Canada is also susceptible to this problem of cultural influence. But the true healing, here's what happened, okay? I love eating stuff that gives my brain the nutrients it needs to think, because then I can speak.
You get that?
Fuck off. Here's the thing. In 2020, this is the truth. in 2020, our species of humanity, the singularity did happen in 2020. The natural flow of evolution into the fifth dimension, into the perception of seeing things backward and forward, sideways and diagonally, all at the same time, in terms of time and the ways our brains think. Through consciousness, we can make these connections that are non-linear, which is bringing time into a place that doesn't move only forward and backward, but also side to side, diagonally, and up and down. So,
Make sure your phone didn't die.
Did it? Okay, how much time are we at?
We're at 23 minutes.
Okay, so this is probably about 15 to 17 of the actual podcast. So, who knows about this, right? What cultures know about this and are aware of this previous to this point in 2020, where the natural, organic reality, like if COVID hadn't happened, every single person who is alive would be in this place all the time. There would be no schism of awareness. It would be so natural, people would not even know what was happening, because it's this natural progression of integrated evolution. And yet, a huge crime against humanity, a huge trauma happened, and the reflections of this trauma continue to self-replicate until the truth is understood, acknowledged, shared, and known. So, Central America, from my perception, has been living in the South America, has knowledge about the fifth dimension, but China, very old country, a country where the idea of we are wise, we know so much, that idea is quite prevalent. And it's also a country where there is massive surveillance, there is a social credit system, there is a conditional value system of different people based on certain networks. So whether this is overt attempts to steal the United States from the inside out of China, or it's a small group of extremely resource-rich people within that culture and potentially other people. The thing is, it's narcissism. And that problem of narcissism is a worldwide problem that a lot of people from different cultures have. But through this situation, here's the thing. Hold on, don't move. This is the thing. This shit, here's the thing. Reality is a perfect mirror. Organic reality is a perfect reflection of synchronicity. Everything has meaning. Everything has double meaning. Everything has triple meaning. Everything has all these meanings that have overtones of harmonics. And yet, this organic, miraculous truth of the universe has been understood by certain people for a long time, and is now being consciously manipulated to present a falsified version of things that appear to have meaning. Phone calls happening at a certain time. This is real more than is comfortable to acknowledge. There is a concerted effort to manipulate and control the timeline of people's frequency of consciousness. People are being made to feel afraid of each other. People are being made to feel uncomfortable using their energy to create self-empowerment and individualism and expression. And consciously, people are being made and conditioned to shut these things down. So many people, both men and women, this is the thing. The true American doesn't fall prey to this. The people that have really made it for themselves, the people that have homesteaded, that are on the land, they hold the true values of the United States, the values of actual freedom. When you are not being perceived, when you are not being judged, when there is no entanglement in the quantum realm connecting you to a network of any other meaning other than your internal soul life force, that is where creativity begins. If we look back in history, the only things that remain from the past are creative, artistic things, whether it's a building, whether it's a painting, whether it's a statue, whether it's music. So,
Some shrimp?
yeah, man. There is another element to this that I will speak about soon that is relevant to your brother and I.
What is this? Just holding it.
Do your performance.
I don't know. I had no idea what to expect going into this podcast. So I'm just glad to be here and hear these ideas.
This is the thing. There are cultures like the Hispanic culture and the Indian culture that have historical cultural trauma, which enables a easily mapped trigger that puts someone in a certain psychological, psycho-emotional, psychosomatic place. And this understanding is being preyed upon. This is also a known and mapped trigger in many female people, and is also a trigger that exists in me because I am also although not as much in my generational cultural DNA, but in my personal life as an individual, I also have this trigger where people can do a certain thing internally, externally, psychically, mentally, intellectually, emotionally, that will engage a physiological trauma response, which will put me in a reactive place where I become a 100% controllable individual that will say and do whatever specific thing is given to me in that moment when my trauma is activated. And this knowledge is being used to essentially and literally stop the evolution of the human species as a whole and keep the singularity from happening in the human species. And what the singularity actually means effectively is a globalized consciousness of civilization, a civilization where the human species and the entity of the collective humanity goes all the way around the globe in an unbroken informational cycle where we continue to build a peaceful, harmonious movement of continued organization of information and knowledge. And yet this natural, organic realization of insight into how we can communicate in these ways that we weren't previously aware of in these subtle realms is being actively manipulated and preyed upon by a certain entity. And I'm here as a United States citizen as a proponent of globalized consciousness, as a demarcator of the truth as I see it in my lived experience and in my reflection as a microcosm of the universe itself, to assure you that while the truth is to see beyond our own identity and view ourselves as a equal and yet unique person who is the same as every other living human soul and every other soul of every other creature and being. While this is the true transition and knowledge, that cannot be accessed or lived in a situation where there is a conditional, distorted, powerful entity that is consciously manipulating the value system and the direction in which people think and people perceive things. There must be an end to this, and I am telling you, there is an entity that represents the spiritual ego of the Chinese culture, whether that is a Chinese person or whether it's a narcissistic billionaire who is in the pockets of certain governments. That is the truth. I have found you, and the game is over. The game of holding this status quo of control in a frozen position where it doesn't evolve. That was the last attempt to continue inequality and to continue segregation. It's over. The United States is a country that is a melting pot of every culture that represents freedom of expression, equality, and the ability for the individual to create their own reality. That is the truth of the law of nature, beyond, before and after, larger and smaller than the human race and the human species. And there's certain languages like Spanish which are grounded in the fifth dimension from what I can tell, although maybe not. I don't really know Spanish. So I just know that a lot of Hispanic people are masters of the fifth dimension. And also a lot of Hispanic people have generational cultural trauma that is so great that they become very easily influenceable from the position of a muse that is sending thoughts. If you hear a thought and your body expresses that thought that you heard without first internalizing it into a unidentifiable, formless place, you are being a host for any sort of cultural conditioning that thought provides. So this is why it's important to balance the masculine and feminine energy. And I've lost my train of thought.
You got it? Are you gonna stop it? Just stop the video already. Let's do another one. I haven't been engaged in this at all. You've just been I've been listening, but I didn't try really to engage with you. These ideas are beyond me. I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to talk about how I started making music and being friends with your brother, and how the entity that was perceiving and surveilling that relationship, because it's a crime against the laws of nature and a crime against humanity to profile people and to view them unconsensually when they don't want to be viewed, And because that was happening, that is a big reason why this issue of COVID has been so bad, is because the socially engineered bioweapon and culturally conditioned thought form evolution was based on a relationship between me, a quarter Ukrainian, Irish and English, predominantly American. Of course, I have a little bit of Native American in me, the 1/28 or so. But, and a half Hispanic, half white, Caucasian. There it is. Person, because we were being profiled unconsensually, which is in essence a racist act. To view anyone as a image, to objectify anyone, is a racist act. And to assume that someone is a reflection of their culture based on their personal characteristics is a extreme flaw, and that is also a defining factor in why this is such a dysfunctional and destructive reality that we are in culturally and universally. Of course, my essence is one that remembers every moment of my life through a conscious development of awareness and skills and choices. I remember every moment of my life, and I retain all of the cycles and patterns and information that I've experienced across all time. And this is why there is so many things that are so many attempts to destroy that perfected awareness through trauma, and why so many people lose so much information because they're traumatized and mistreated. And anytime that happens, we lose this connection with our long-term memory, and we can very easily become identified with a self-perception that is not as clear as certain other times in our lives. And yet there's things that we can do to remember these things, to replace and reintegrate lost memories and lost things. And at the very simplest way of doing this is to spend time in a peaceful nature area. The other thing to do is to continue placing a huge amount of value on your own emotional self-expression, and express your emotions beyond any cultural conditioning, religious conditioning, self-perception of shame or guilt around expressing certain emotions. The third thing is to focus on one's sexuality, the generating life force that creates all matter. By loving and empowering our own sexuality, we empower our own life force and give ourselves energy and self-esteem to express our emotions, which allows for a more present experience. Once we express all our emotions, we can be present. And if we express any repressed emotions, we also regain access to memories that are associated with those emotions. So, yep. The people that are creating and reciprocating this horrible abuse, mistreatment, and destruction of human awareness, whether they're hosts of an external entity programming them, or are themselves a extremely flawed and destructive person, the issue is narcissism. So narcissism can be a defense mechanism against extreme trauma in some cases, but regardless, it can also be a, look at all those red apples, huh? It can be a, this is the problem. Narcissists, and especially women, being too far right. The interesting thing is that the political system in the United States is flipped, where the red conservative side is more secure in their own understanding through the defining factors of the United States culture. And the left is scratching and searching and attempting to exist in a way that is a far right style of extreme information control. So vote for Donald Trump, the liberal candidate who is part of the conservative party. Who understands that the idea of playing God in other people's lives is not allowed by the universe itself, and the truth that we are God in our own lives is the reality that we all live in. And when we all recognize that we're all God, we all treat each other as the reflections of who we want to see. So now, where's the microphone?
I appreciate you throwing that mic down on me. And this is brought to you by Nacho Cheese Doritos.
This cultural trauma that happens when people take over a different culture's area and lifestyle and incept it with a different one happened in Mexico with the Spaniards coming to the Mayans and taking over the Mayan culture. And this is what I see in you, my friend, this beautiful wisdom of timeless reality that is oftentimes being hijacked by this false communication network of unconsensual psychic dialogue.
Unconsensual psychic dialogue.
Yeah.
I think I might know what you mean.
I just, through being a musician, so I restarted the recording because I had to plug my phone in. The rest of this may be on patreon.com/formlessness. That's patreon.com/formlessness. And one more time, patreon.com/formlessness. If you want to go check that out. But no, yeah. No. Yay.
No? No.
This is it's an interesting paradox. Through being a musician, I have the blessing and the curse of having a very, very extremely sensitive and tuned inner ear, to the point where I can hear the frequency of someone's internal brain wave thinking when they're thinking about me. I can hear your thoughts a lot of the time. And I also, through being an artist whose choice and motivation is to make my life completely transparent, also broadcast my thoughts in this way, to the point where I have noticed how much that is being hijacked and preyed upon and manipulated. This entire narrative of the thoughts people have about me as a artistic reflection of the universe are being consciously manipulated and formulated into like this, and we all, people know it. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Because the point for me, my personal self, is to be transcending my identity fully. What were you saying, though? What were we talking about?
Oh, you were commenting on, like, unconsensual psychic dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
So I think I know what you mean. I'm also kind of guilty of that.
Well,
as the
it may not be your fault. It may be that because of your ethnic background, you have DNA trauma, and that comes from this.
I don't say it has anything to do with an ethnic background, really.
Not
or like
not
trauma.
only, but sometimes it does. Like it definitely is true for India. And anyone that has
For India.
Yeah, because that's also a culture that's run by a feminine spiritual authority. And the feminine spiritual authority can be used and manipulated to no end to give people any kind of thought in a way where they think that it has resonance and that it is truthful, when in reality it's not. Whereas a masculine spiritual authority, when a masculine spiritual authority goes out of alignment or out of resonance or makes a mistake, it's a very obvious external thing where it's like, oh, this is like Old Testament shit, where it's like these days in the New Testament and beyond, we're like, oh, God's not actually ever going to do anything evil. If God ever blows up or makes a mistake or whatever, that's not God. But a feminine spiritual deity can do the dark and twisted manipulation forever without being caught nearly as easily, because it's just this suggestion of a thought, like, ooh, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so it's much more difficult to fully take account, hold that to accountability. You have to be a very tuned and perceptive and intelligent detective to get to the bottom of where every single thought is coming from. And that's why it's very important that we share this message. Can you please hold this? The obvious evolution of consciousness is to be transparent about everything and to be unconditional about everything, so that equality and cohabitation, equality and so that equality and integration can exist between all concepts and matter. That is the obvious. That's the obvious movement of more refined consciousness. We understand that everything is everything. We understand that everything is equal. We end segregation and end a dogmatic, conditional-based hierarchy of values, because we equalize everything. Everything is the same yet different. Everything is everything. This is the obvious movement of evolution of consciousness, and yet it's being withheld. It's being looped back. The status quo is being frozen by narcissists who, because of their inadequacy, because of their fear of death, try to freeze time in a moment where they feel powerful. And that is not allowed by the universe, extremely destructive, and not okay in any way. So thanks for holding this up for me.
No one else is gonna do it.
That's not true. Every word we say literally creates the reality around us.
Let's finish eating those first.
Every word we say literally creates the reality around us. So I only say things that are uplifting to myself and others equally, and that are true reflections of the experience I'm having. So if someone's mistreating me, I'll say that. And I'll acknowledge the ways in which they're doing that, and the ways that in which that is being broken, that boundary. However, in a neutral place, I speak in a way that creates the reality around me. I live in peace, I live in harmony, I live in equality, because everything that you say is a sound that has a meaning that is created in physical reality, in the 3D dimension, by the body speaking the sound physically. So the things we say out loud and the things that we think both create reality and are both elements of the physical realm, even the mental stuff. And that's why it's such an interesting point where someone else's thought can enter your mind, and then you become a host for someone else's thought because you're thinking their thought. Do you want to talk on the podcast or off the podcast? I only have one microphone, but I'm on a roll, so we could talk. No? Okay. I think that's good. This is the thing. We're meant to share everything. And we can share everything only when it's consensual. Otherwise, we feel all this guilt and shame about stealing and destiny swapping and stuff like this. Listen, we are at the center of COVID. Our relationship was surveilled because we're on the West Coast, and that all three of these states are constantly, everything is being watched from overseas. And based on our relationship, COVID was created because the people overseas saw your failure to respect my knowledge and they were racist about that failure, because that failure is yours personally, but they interpreted it as being reflective of Latina ethnicity and culture. And that's why they created co-vid, and it's a big problem because they misinterpreted your personal character flaws as ethnic character flaws. And that's why we are where we are. Whereas your personal flaws are probably reflective of the actual surveillance that happened throughout your life. Alright, well, let's talk off record, shall we? Off record, that's the problem. There